Check, check. Ooh, you guys can hear me. All right, good afternoon, everyone. We're very aware that we are the last presentation. We are standing between you and your lunch. So we promise to give you this information in a meaningful, informative, but most importantly, fast way so we can all get to lunch. Again, really happy to be here. Thanks to the organizers for inviting us. My first SeleniumConf was back in 2015 in Portland, Oregon, and I was working the booth for Sauce Labs. And I can't believe that now I'm here on stage. I know I speak for Samantha, who's also a former SeleniumConf attendee, that we are really honored to be here and hope that you enjoy this presentation on headless testing in Selenium. So before we dive into the content, just a quick agenda to let everyone know what we're going to talk about here for the next 50 or so minutes. So to start, we're going to do a 30,000-foot view of where the market is headed and the industry and why headless testing has become a bit of a hot topic in certain circles and why more and more companies are embracing the idea of headless testing with Selenium. We'll also dive into some key use cases that Samantha and I, as product-focused folks at Sauce Labs, that we've run into from surveying our customers to doing lots of working sessions with them to understand the need for headless testing. And then finally, Sam will show a brief demo of headless testing in action to hopefully, so you can see some of the benefits and how you can incorporate headless testing into your own a larger continuous testing strategy. So for those who don't know me, hajime mashite. My name is Alissa Lydon. I'm a product marketing manager here at Sauce Labs. That's my contact information up there. Would love to stay in touch with everyone. Fun fact about me is this is not my first time in Japan. I used to live here for 2 years. 2年間愛媛県に住んでいました。So I love being back in my second home. I consider Japan my second home. And again, really, really pleased to be here. It feels like I'm back home already.
I only speak English, I'm sorry. But my name is Samantha Coffman, and I'm also in product at Sauce Labs. And I got a Twitter 2 nights ago. So let's hit me up with some followers. Let's get started.
What's been your favorite part about Japan so far, Sam?
So I saw Kabuki Theater yesterday. That was really interesting. And I also ate sushi from the fish market and just about died. It was the greatest thing I've ever had.
This is the longest time we've gone without eating food. We're just eating our way through this
So we will
city.
talk through this quickly.
Next slide. You got this. Okay, we're going manual. Okay, so everyone here in this room is very aware that the methodologies by which we create software has gone through a massive paradigm shift. Organizations of all sizes now are moving away from this legacy traditional waterfall style method, mostly because every step was one after the other. Teams were very siloed, so development and QA sat in 2 different places and never met in the middle. And most importantly for this group, testing was left towards the end of the development lifecycle. And this meant that all errors and bugs were mostly found really close to deploy. And this meant that releases were often pushed, there were many delays, there were teams scrambling around trying to chase down bugs that frankly could have been caught earlier in the development cycle. And so this is why Agile has really gained a lot of popularity. I'm not here to talk to you about what is Agile, but what I do want to say that's important for us to consider is that it really embraces this idea of cross-functional teams, every step being really interconnected with each other, dev and QA working very tightly to deliver applications in much smaller packages, meaning more frequent releases, meaning happier customers that are seeing new functionality and updates to your application. And so for the past number of years, everyone was talking about agile development. But if you're changing the way that you're making your software, there are a lot of people who believe you should also change the way that you test your software. This phrase, continuous testing, has been everywhere in the market. It's frankly being overused in some cases, but To keep it simple, continuous testing is the idea that you should test earlier and more often throughout the pipeline. Let quality be the gatekeeper between each step in your software development lifecycle. And so this requires those walls to break down between dev and QA, as now testing is what we're calling shifting left, or happening earlier in the pipeline. And what this has done is it's not only changed the way that testers work, but now we're seeing it bleed into the development space, and developers are really starting to see a massive shift in their workflows.
Yeah, so Alyssa's mentioning the market. I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the trends that we're seeing in this shift left movement. So sort of to make the case for early pipeline testing and validated by the market and some of the process changes, as well as some of the tooling that's coming out. So DevOps is really encouraging developers to test more. We're seeing the shift more and more, which I think is why we see more developers at conferences like these. It's becoming really important for them to take responsibility for their code coverage and testing it, even testing it down to the end-to-end. And this is evidenced by the tooling that's come out. Some JS frameworks are becoming really popular for WebDriver, like Nightwatch.js and WebDriver.io. And this is just furthering the case for encouraging developers to continue to test. React and Angular, I'm sure some of you have built in React and Angular, and this is really the future of web. We're seeing more and more React and Angular components having a really strong need to be tested earlier on, rather than waiting much later, because how they interact with other parts of the application is really important to validate in the actual time that you're building it. Additionally, and I'll talk about, I'm going to show a testing pyramid and this new concept of the testing trophy. Maybe you guys have seen it. I'll talk a little bit more about how this rise in components is going to increase the number of integration tests that you're going to want to test, and how this sort of changed the traditional testing pyramid that we know today. Additionally, another thing that we've been seeing in the market for like the past 10 years, it's just continuing to grow, is the importance of Chrome. And we're really seeing Chrome as the best first check to validate functionality, specifically if you're a developer trying to validate the JavaScript and see if it's working as expected. Chrome is a really great place to do that. So this leads to the question, and what we're going to be focusing most of our presentation today on is, well, if Chrome is the best first check, if we're running more integration tests, and we're thinking more in the developer mindset, how can we discover a new infrastructure option that's more lightweight, that fits these new needs? So that's really what we're going to be focusing on today. So Martin Fowler has done a concept of this. This is a little more detailed, and I'm sure everyone's seen this before. We write a lot of unit tests, right? Especially developers, and that's great. But for this new future of web, and we talk about component level testing, unit tests aren't as useful for validating if things work together, and if things are working as expected when you bring it all together. So you have some automated tests, lots of them. They're easy to write. There's so many frameworks available to do so. You have some automated component tests, integration tests, API tests, and then of course, end-to-end testing is really important. This is sort of a new thing. I've been toying with the idea that this is not taking into account of the usefulness of each of these buckets, but it's also not taking into account of what the infrastructure is needed at each of these points. So the infrastructure needed at unit testing level, you can do it locally, really simple. For automated component tests, automated integration tests, and automated API testing, it's typically done in the same type of infrastructure environment that end-to-end is testing in. And this is really expensive. So if you click, if we see how Angular, React, and how the industry is changing towards component, because component tests are really, really valuable. Integration, how things work together is super valuable, and you get a great bang for your buck, but not if it's in the same infrastructure that you're running your end-to-end tests on. So we're gonna talk about how we adjust to this new pyramid. I was calling it a pyramid before, it looks like a trophy. So this new trophy of how we think about testing and its usefulness and the infrastructure to solve that problem.
Who created that trophy again?
Oh, Kent Dobbs. I knew I was going to forget his name.
Yeah.
He has a great article on it about why component testing is so important, why integration testing is so important. There's also a tweet by Guillermo, I'm blanking on his name. It says, write tests, mostly integration tests. And this really is the This is really what we're focusing today on talking about, is how important this shift is in the market. As product managers, we're looking at that all the time, and how to adjust the technology solutions for that.
So Sam set the landscape for us really well here, I think, to really hopefully help you agree with us that testing is truly shifting left. And so in this typical delivery pipeline, there are different stages with different types of tests. And while, at least in my experience here at SeleniumConf, or when we speak about Selenium, we really talk a lot towards the end of the pipeline, because that's really Selenium's major strong suit, is that cross-browser compatibility, that massive amount of coverage, the ability to parallelize and automate easily. We're now seeing that shift happening left into the red box here on this slide, and we're seeing more and more automated Selenium tests and related frameworks moving earlier in the pipeline before even integration. So developers are still running their local unit test on units of code, but as they package together components to get ready to merge, they're running more and more automation earlier in the pipeline. And because of this, as Sam mentioned, there are some new challenges that we're seeing arise with a lot of even advanced testing teams that we speak with every day. The first, and probably the most important, is the cultural shift. Organizations that want to incorporate more testing earlier in the pipeline are really having to teach their developers to change the way they think about how they do their jobs. They're responsible for writing not just code, but writing testable code, and also writing those tests in some cases. So it's really important to get that buy-in and break down those walls between development and QA so there can be tight collaboration. The second is that sharing resources, the infrastructure problem, and this is where Headless is going to start coming into play. So now that there's a larger suite of tests are expanding in the pipeline. Now development is hitting infrastructure and grids that were normally just reserved for QA. And when we see everyone hitting that infrastructure at the same time, we see a lot of queuing up for tests, a lot of throttling. And in a developer's world where they want fast feedback, that's actually quite counterproductive for their work. If they're waiting for tests to pass, then why are they testing at all? And then this leads to the idea of context switching, and how context switching becomes very detrimental to the productivity, not just of developers, but of testers as well. So context switching, for those who aren't familiar, there are a lot of great articles around this. Context switching is the idea that I'm working on one task, I think I finished that task, and I'm like, okay, done. And now I'm gonna move on to the next task, and I'm like, okay, I'm gonna work on this, I'm feeling very productive. But now someone says, hey, wait, there's something wrong with this. And now all of a sudden I need to take my energy away from my new task and go back to the old, and go back and forth. And this limits my productivity, it limits the productivity of the team I might be working on, and the organization as a whole. And so this idea of creating a system that's meeting the needs for fast feedback and empowering developers to really lean into this idea of shift left testing and testing earlier in the pipeline, it's important that we understand these problems. And this is where we're gonna kind of dive in a little bit. We'll double click on this a little bit more. The first is the cultural shift. This is the only slide I'm going to dedicate to this. We're only going to pass through it a little bit quickly, just because every organization is different, every culture is different. We can offer advice and guidance, but it's hard to bring in consultants who can change development culture and testing culture. It has to come from within. But some of the advanced shift left organizations that we've been speaking to share a lot of these common characteristics. The first is that there's a realization internally that early pipeline testing, or shift left testing, needs to move away from the paradigm of time-based testing. So think nightly regressions, or testing at the end of every 2-week sprint. And instead, testing becomes an event-based paradigm. So testing on every pull request, every commit. These organizations that are shifting testing left also understand that while development and QA usually had different priorities, those priorities are starting to shift or merge together. Everyone is now concerned not just with delivering code, but delivering quality code. It's really baked into their culture. And what's great about this is as these changes start to happen culturally, testers and QA engineers are in a really unique role and position to be leaders in this change. Testers, again, were sometimes thought as they're over here, we don't talk to them, they don't talk to us. But now all of a sudden in these shift left organizations, testers are the subject matter experts. And they're in high demand in these development teams to learn best practices to ensure that everything is running smoothly and that they're getting the best benefits from implementing automated testing earlier in the pipeline. And so it's critical that these QA teams provide development with a great experience. Teams that kind of go about this haphazardly, we find a lot of false, flaky tests, false positives, just not so great practices, and that actually can be counterproductive to the cultural shift, just because it breeds distrust in automation as a whole. And so for QA, it's really important to take that leadership role and understand that they're the key to achieving these sorts of benefits of early pipeline testing.
I feel like we're doing a little dance. You want to switch?
I know, right?
Okay. Cool. So Alissa talked a bit about the culture. I'm going to dive into the new persona that we're talking about here as we shift left, different people responsible for different things. In this scenario, as we talk about the context switching, as we talk about developers being very familiar with JavaScript and the different frameworks that are rising, I'm going to quickly walk through. This is a very simplified flow about what a developer is doing every day, but this is enough to at least dive into the challenges that we see. So writing code, again, one of the challenges we see here is some of the frameworks that are available or were available a couple years ago weren't as suitable because they weren't in JavaScript for WebDriver. Now we're seeing things like Nightwatch.js and WebDriver IO. And unit testing is done locally, right? So this is sort of a problem that the market's solving and that doesn't really need solving right now. And the testing locally. So then you can also test, maybe you want to spin up some browsers locally to just validate some functionality, which is fine. But as we're talking about, the market is shifting and we're seeing more and more these integration tests taking popularity, needing to run more component tests. So what we get into, the challenge here, if you want to get up the next one, is this: we don't have an infrastructure that can meet this demand. We don't have an infrastructure that can meet the scalability that's being asked of developers to test. So it's great that we're seeing these frameworks emerging, but there's other problems to solve. And then additionally, submitting a PR, where does this all fit into whatever CI/CD tool that you're using, that your organization is using? How will that all integrate? So again, just to reiterate some of the challenges, developers aren't as familiar with writing end-to-end tests in language they don't know. This is sort of a problem that's being solved within the open source community. This is something Alissa talked about a little bit. You get into a problem near the right side with sharing resources. Our traditional VMs, as we know today, are pretty expensive to maintain, or if you're doing it with a third-party vendor like Sauce, it's expensive. And so sharing resources with those, with QA can be difficult and can become expensive. So you start to see issues such as throttling or queuing up, and waiting in line is not something that developers want to do. Infrastructure options, like I said, are really expensive, just reiterating this point, and it doesn't give developer teams the confidence to release the code if they haven't tested on their own and they don't have dedicated resources available to them and just them to get the type of feedback they need. So this is really all around new persona. How do we solve this new problem for them? And what's the infrastructure that makes the most sense at this point in time? So now I'm almost to the solution. I've been like teeing you guys up, really close. So we also know this is a challenge if you're not convinced yet because Sauce had it. Diego's sitting here up front. He's dealing with the problem right now. So essentially we needed a way to reliably ship code faster, and we basically dedicated a whole internal team called the Kill the Build team. And this team was responsible for building out what would become the first iteration of our headless internal solution. We built it out on a containerized infrastructure. I'll talk about that in a little bit. And it was great because it improved our developer velocity. It improved the feedback they could get early on, and they didn't have to go through our integration build and wait for 2 hours for tests to pass. They could validate what they needed against the headless infrastructure that we had built out, get the feedback, and then maybe if there was a failure, debug in the VM because there was full video available. I'll go into that a bit too. But it really was a great sanity check, a really good first check to move on to the next step. And then just to reiterate, as our architecture evolved internally at Sauce, we're starting to see that the market was asking for the same thing, which is why we're here, which is why we're sharing this with everyone.
So this is why headless browsers are starting to emerge as a solution, not just for Sauce Labs and our particular pain points, but for organizations of all sizes and all maturity levels. Sam is going to get into details about what constitutes a headless browser and what are some of the benefits and drawbacks. But the reason why headless browsers have started gaining popularity is that they're considered fast browsers. What does that mean? Well, since headless browsers don't have a GUI that they operate on, usually it takes a little less time for them to spin up. This isn't always the case, actually. We've been doing a lot of tests internally, but they on average tend to be faster. But really where the speed advantage is seen is because it's such a lightweight option and can be operated at a lower cost, you can start running in massive parallel, right? And so the speed isn't necessarily in test execution, it's about getting that fast feedback by parallelizing those tests at a higher rate. And that's the real speed benefit for a lot of organizations by using headless earlier in the pipeline. It's also a really ideal choice because, again, getting that fast feedback for developers is key. So they can run those sanity checks, those pull request component tests. And then if a bug is found, they can quickly find that issue, isolate it, and fix it before it becomes a bigger problem later on in the pipeline. And so now, again, everyone is happy. Developers are committing code with more confidence. Testers are happier because they're not chasing down all of these bugs that you're thinking, why didn't development catch this sooner? So it's the reason why kind of headless has been starting. We see this perfect storm starting to happen with shift left, where there is a very valid use case for headless browsers.
So what the heck is a headless browser? You probably already know, but I'll share quickly with you what the difference between a headed and a headless browser is. Is this on?
It is.
You guys can hear me? Thumbs up? Cool. Okay, so traditionally you have a virtual machine. It can be running in the cloud. In this instance, and at Sauce, it runs in a data center. And that because of that, you're able to run a GUI on top of it, and that gives you the ability to record video. So then you have the browser rendering on top, and you can record video. You have rich debugging capabilities. In addition, you can run things like IE7. You can run across multiple operating systems and browser combinations. Again, this is really valuable, and we're not advocating to move away from this. This is really valuable, but for a particular purpose. And then versus a headless browser, which is just that. It's just a browser. It's rendering without a UI. And because of that, it's running a bit faster, about 10% faster in execution. Again, the real speed benefit that we saw internally at Sauce, and I'll talk about that in a second, is we built a containerized infrastructure right next to where we were running our tests. So it reduced a lot of the latency, and we were able to get that feedback really quickly. I'm gonna run through this one really quickly too, because I am not a container expert. But I will say that the decision to run this in a containerized infrastructure was a very conscious one that came from product. Today, like I said, we virtualize our machines for our cross-browser offering, and we do that in a data center. You can do it in the cloud if you'd like. And really the unique benefit that this has is you have a guest operating system for every single browser that you're running up. So you get to do cross-OS, cross-browser. It's very secure, and that's been validated by the market. It's been around for a while. Containers, however, I used to think about it like a bucket, and I don't know how technically feasible or accurate this is, but I used to think, okay, that's a big bucket. Guest operating system is taking up a lot of space. How about this new bucket? Look at how many containers I could fit into this bucket. And that was the right way to think about it because it was cheaper. We could fit more containers for the cluster that we spun up in GKE than we could in our data center infrastructure. So we were able to reduce our cost by almost a fourth of what we were doing in our VM infrastructure. And this was really great because, again, we're really driving this point home. We want to keep the scalability to a point where we can auto scale up to whatever we need, because developers are going to have these on-demand event type based testing where they're going to need to scale up to like 800, 1,000 headless browsers to validate functionality. Okay, now I'm going to talk about integrating headless into your testing strategy and what that means for your organization or your teams. And again, like Alissa mentioned, every organization is different. I'm going to keep this pretty high level. So first I'm going to talk about the macro view, right? Where in the pipeline, where in that pipe that Alissa showed a while back, does it make the most sense to think about putting headless in? On every PR. I mean, this makes the most sense to me when we talk about event-based testing and validating things right when you're working on it. You sort of reduce the need to context switch. You can get your feedback really quickly, and you don't have to pass on, I guess, the problems to another team. That's what I'm going to demo today. I'm going to show you guys basically a web application that we use at Sauce and show you some changes and some tests and say, okay, on this PR, I'm going to run these tests, and you'll see that I get the feedback really quickly. Additionally, just a sanity check, like, did I break anything? This is really valid feedback to know. No one's perfect, no developer's code is perfect, we know that. Validating things early on before having to pass it off can really improve development velocity. And Center of Excellence and QA managers will see this over time. It will reduce the need to basically have stories going over into the next sprint and waiting forever because your bugs are coming in super late. And then overall, like the most top level, this is the scalable infrastructure for shift left. This is what we see as the best solution for the new problems that we see when we shift left. So then what type of tests? So now we're looking at the micro view. So what type of tests make the most sense? I want to level set. I don't think there's tests that you should run in headless that you should never run in cross-browser. I don't think there's a concept of headless tests and cross-browser tests. I think there is a place where headless makes the most sense at a different time, but anything you run in a headless browser, you should also run against production because, let's be honest, none of your customers are going to pull up your app on a headless Linux. Like, that's not going to happen. So you want to make sure that you're still validating things in a real machine, but what makes the most sense for headless, which type of test, is atomic, which basically means you're validating one functionality. Short, meaning it runs quickly, you're not having a bunch of test files integrated into one another, you're not having one check have to happen first before the next check can happen. It can parallelize really well. And then again, it's also, the integration tests are really great. So if you're running integration tests for your web application and it's a component module and you want to see how it works with other pages on your app, this is another great way to use headless. And Alyssa's going to go into some use cases and some specific examples. I just wanted to paint the top level view.
Okay, so let's dig in one level deeper, and as Sam mentioned, talk about some use cases. And these are some use cases that either we've thought through ourselves internally or that we've actually seen with other teams, other of our customers that we've interviewed. The first is the case of in-context component level testing. So in this case, I'm a developer who's working on a web application, and in 17 pages of our web application, we're communicating with our users via this modal style dialog box. And we thought it was working well until the UX team comes back and says, this isn't the best customer experience for our users. It blocks the whole page. It requires this superfluous click. It's not really giving us much information. So let's go ahead and we're going to change it to optimize the experience. We're going to change it to a flyout, right? So mouse hovers over, text pops out. So as a developer, before my organization started shifting left, I would test my code in isolation, make sure it worked as expected, and then pass it on, right? But now that we're shifting left, now that I've embraced this idea of running more tests earlier in the pipeline, instead, before I move this new component into all of the 14 pages that we need to change this functionality, I'm going to start developing a single test method, maybe in WebDriver IO or Selenium or some related framework that's going to hit every single page that incorporates this new flyout. And so with this headless test, with the headless infrastructure, I can now run 14 concurrent tests if I want to on this one component, get the fast feedback that this works as expected, without having to fight for resources with QA, right? I don't need a full browser to check this. I just need to check this one component. Later on in the pipeline, the QA team will do the same exact thing across every browser, every operating system, ensuring things work as expected in a production environment. But for me as a developer, Headless is going to work best for this solution while being able to justify the cost at which it operates. The second one is a use case that has a mobile touch to it. And for those who aren't familiar, obviously in headless browsers, you can't run in real devices, not yet anyway. But any of you who are familiar with a guy named Quo Ding, he created this mobile test automation pyramid that's really smart. And one of the ideas he has in his mobile automation pyramid is that early in the pipeline, you can run component level tests on resized browser windows. And that's just to help improve efficiency and drive down costs to maintain infrastructure. And so with that in mind, let's say, again, I'm a developer and we have a desktop web app and we're gonna expand into mobile. And so now we need to make sure that our application has the same look and feel, no matter the window size, but that also the controls operate the same. So maybe on the mobile app, we have a hamburger menu that gives us the menu of options. We need to make sure that everything works as expected, all while using the same code. And so ideally what, as a developer would do, is I would design tests to check for the same controls, the same menu options, the same header look and feel, all from in the same order. And so I'll use something like page objects to abstract, like clicking on the hamburger menu to make sure everything works as expected in a mobile resolution. I'll make those tests in parallel so that I can check all the different sizes and options for different device types. And again, at this stage, running in Headless is my best option for a quick sanity check before I merge into master. Again, the real devices will come later in the pipeline when the QA team runs the full regression. But for me as a developer, this really works best for me to continue to feel productive while also testing more.
Cool, so now I'm gonna show you guys a demo of what we built internally as a solution. It's gonna look a lot like Sauce. If you use Sauce, you'll recognize it. But let me just set the stage for a second. So I'm going to submit a PR to make a change to our Sauce demo app. So let me pull that up really quickly. We can still see? Okay. So this is Swag Labs, which is just the most adorable thing in the world. And I'm gonna order a backpack and a Sauce Labs onesie. And I wanna make sure that I'm validating all these things. So I have some tests running. They're Ruby tests. They're utilizing Water, the Selenium wrapper for Ruby. And I have a bunch of tests here that are just validating some basic functionality, making sure if I log in, I'm using the right password, and if I log in incorrectly, it throws me an error, just some basic tests. So what I'm gonna do here is I have it set up where I'm hitting our internal infrastructure, our Sauce Lab solution for this, and I'm running 8 parallel sessions, and there's 6 tests going right now. I think there's a couple that are running on Chrome 70, Chrome 71, Chrome 72. So this will parallelize pretty quickly, and you can see I'm already getting my feedback before I even finish talking to you guys about this. So it's running right now. It'll say, you know, how many seconds it took to complete one of the tests. And then additionally, we have, of course it logged me out. We have this running in this is our internal UI for these tests that are running. As you can see, it went up to, I think it was about 18 sessions that were running. And typically, this will beat, typically this beats the UI. So we'll see that we have some failures. And with these failures, you know, like I said, they ran in Headless. I got feedback that my test did pass, but there was one failure. I want to validate that maybe on a VM. So our team, the organization that I'm in, let's say has 3 VM resources available, but we have like 30 Headless. I would run these first on Headless, and then I see that I have, I have 3 failures. I'll go run those against those 3 VMs that I have to debug, and because there's video available, I can really dive into the details. So this sort of gives me that sanity check early on, and as you can see, it only took what was that, 80 seconds, 60 seconds? Can't see that. Which is really fast for this number of tests running against an application. And it's not like hours I'm waiting around. And again, this is a dedicated resource. This is something that I get to use without having to pull resources away from other teams or have to wait in line to get through what we have available for down to the right. I already did that. Demo time happened. Great. So now I want to bring it all back to the trophy that I showed earlier on, and I want to really drive this point home about what is Headless in our mind not designed to do. Again, like I said earlier, no one's going to navigate to your web application on a headless browser running on Linux. So you want to make sure that you're still running whatever you're running in production, your regression tests, if you're doing visual testing, you want to make sure you're still running that against real production environment, in a real production environment, so that it basically mirrors what your customer will be doing. Again, you don't want to use Headless to run rich debugging that you would use video for example, which is okay because as we've been talking about, the developer persona is really interested in, did this work or did I break stuff? So this is, again, we still see this type of work being done later on in the pipeline further right. And then again, I really want to drill this point home. No concept of headless tests, cross-browser tests. You don't want to replace any of the existing tests you have. This is really, you have your Selenium tests today, and you want to point them at a headless browser or a headless infrastructure that we built internally on containers in the cloud. You want to point that to the new infrastructure earlier on, and you're going to have new teams essentially doing that. Or if your developers already test, now you have an amazing lightweight infrastructure for them to spin up their tests on. So that's all we have. This was really exciting for us to research. I've been knee-deep in Headless for the past year. So feel free to come up and talk to me or Alissa at lunch. We'll be around for the next, bunch of talks today. We'll be around for a little bit tomorrow. So we're really excited and love talking about this. So yeah, that's it. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Alissa and Samantha. Yeah. Okay. If anyone has question, please raise your hand.
We did such a good job explaining that
No
no one
questions?
has questions. Yes,
We'll take personal questions too. I mean, just kidding. Don't ask me that.
Yeah, and I guess Alissa is very good at Japanese, so even Japanese question.
まだまだ無理。
Not yet.
英語だけください。
No questions? Ooh, I see one.
Okay, we need one mic.
Oh,
Please.
Let's see, you're gonna answer. Oh, right.
Okay. Just one, sorry.
It's okay. It's okay. We're close. We don't mind being close to each other.
こんにちは。素晴らしいセッションありがとうございました。Only Japanese, OK? OK? Thank you.
通訳あります。
はい、ありがとうございます。はい。で、ソースラブズで働いている方に一つお伺いしたいことがありまして、先ほどヘッドレスブラウザーについてお話があったかと思うんですが、そのヘッドレスブラウザーっていうと Chrome のヘッドレスブラウザーっていうイメージが個人的にはすごい強いんですね。で、IE とかのインターネットエクスプローラーのヘッドレスブラウザをどう実現しているのか、OS とかってどう実現しているのかとか、あと IE のドライバーとかそういった問題をどう解決されているのかっていうのは個人的に気になったもので質問させていただいたんですがというところです。
That's a great question. Everyone loves IE here. So you'll need to run, at Sauce, if you're using Sauce or you're using a third-party vendor, whatever you're using, Headless doesn't have a solution yet today. So Mozilla and Chromium maintain their Headless solution, and we're really dependent on them for the headless browser solution that we've built internally. Unfortunately, there's no headless browser equivalent for Internet Explorer, so you would need to do it on what exists today out in the market, whatever third-party vendor that would be. But I will say that, well, I guess no, you can't do this, so never mind. Yeah, I was gonna say containerize it. There's a talk later about Windows containerization. I will not go into that. But yeah, you would probably need to reproduce it on a headed browser. That answer the question? Good? Cool.
Yeah. Any other question? Yeah.
So you mentioned that Chrome is the best first check. What about Firefox? What
Yes.
makes Chrome the best?
Yes. So the solution that we built internally, we're running Chrome headless as well as Firefox headless. So we have both. The Chromium project maintains the headless solution, in my opinion, a bit better. We've run into a lot of problems with Mozilla's, but it's still available. It's not as fast. We've seen about 10% increase in execution time with Chrome's, and headless Firefox is actually slower than their headed version, which is frustrating. But that being said, it is available. So if you do want to run and validate functionality on headless Firefox, that is possible. Why we are seeing and why I stated that Chrome is the best first check. Again, this is in response to what I see on the browser market share just in general, and what the most popular frameworks are being built on top of. React and Angular, I see all the time, especially with developers, as being the most popular framework to build on. And that obviously is optimized for Chrome, and it's really great to get feedback in Chrome first, because you know it'll work when you're building using React or Angular. But Firefox is available, and it's also a great first check. It's just the second most popular browser in the market. I actually don't know what it is specifically in Japan. I know the global market share, and I know US and Germany, but I guess I didn't do that homework, if anyone knows. Any other questions? What's for lunch? I don't know. I'm sorry. I wish I did.
Okay.
One thing. Oh, do you have another question? Question?
Okay, maybe that's the question. Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, thank you very much for the great presentation.
Thank
and
you.
I have one quick question. Is that so you running in the background is headless like mode, right? So can it take a screenshot even in a headless?
Yes, so that's possible. And for our internal solution, we've built it so that you can get screenshots for every Selenium command that you're running. You can click through, validate. The video, however, not available, like I said, but screenshots are available. That's sort of like an add-on. Our team had to build it internally, but it is possible. Yeah. Any other questions? Last one? Okay, so this is my first conference, and I would love, that I'm speaking at, I would love if I can get a selfie with everyone. Would you guys smile for me? Yes? Okay. I'm just gonna get a quick selfie. Please look more excited. Woo! Selenium! Okay.
Wow.
Hi, cheese.
Hi, cheese it. All right, thank you guys.
Thank you, Alissa and